Good morning. Today is Sunday, December 17th, 2023. So yesterday in the synagogue, we read one of the most famous narratives in all of biblical literature, the Haftora, the passage from the prophets, Sefer Malachim, the book of Kings. It's a story at the beginning of the reign of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, and that sets the tone. We discussed this on Friday, and we discussed how this narrative at the very beginning of his reign sets the tone for his reign of 40 years, a golden era in Jewish history with peace and with justice and with respect for law. Today, I want to continue and add two crucial points. The first is a fundamental truth of human nature, and the second is a very practical lesson that we can apply in our lives every day. Both of these derive from this narrative, and both are very important for us to understand. So, just to review the details, two women appear before Shlomo. One of the women has a baby. The other woman does not have a baby. The woman without the baby says, both of us, we were living in the same house, and we both gave birth to a baby. No one else was in the house at the time, and her baby died, meaning the one who's holding the baby. So the allegation is her baby died, and in the middle of the night, she came and took my baby and stole my baby. So the baby that woman is holding, that's my baby. The woman with the baby says, no, this is my baby that I'm holding. It is her baby that died. So Shlomo famously asks for a sword. He holds the sword and he says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to divide the baby, and you will each get half. The woman who is holding the baby says, no, please, give it to the other woman. I would rather it go to the other woman rather than any harm come to the baby. Shlomo then says, the woman holding the baby is the true mother, and grants the baby to the woman who is holding the baby. All right. Number one, an insight into human nature, and this is something that we have to always keep in mind. This is an insight that comes from Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, and he says as follows: let's consider for a moment the woman who spoke first, the woman who was not holding a baby. Now, you understand that, of course, the two women both know the truth. I mean, they're not necessarily telling the truth, right? But the two women know what happened. The point of the narrative is, will Shlomo be able to figure out which of them is telling the truth? But the truth is known. So let's consider the woman who comes to Shlomo, who speaks first, who does not have the baby. Now we know, by the end of the story, that the baby is not hers. And she is attempting, through approaching Shlomo, to take the baby from its rightful mother and take it for herself. What is the motivation of this woman? I mean, you realize that for the rest of her life, she will know that the baby she raises is not her own, right? She knows the truth that it was her own baby that Nebuch died, and she knows that she has stolen this baby from the other woman. So she's going to be raising a child that's not hers. What will she gain with this act of theft from the real mother? Well, what she will gain is there is a part within a person, a characteristic within a person that wants to give to another, that wants to help another, that wants to love and nourish and raise another. This woman wants to be able to have a child that she can love, that she can feed, that she can raise. She wants to be able to give the love and the nourishing and the attention that she has to this baby. It's an amazing thing. She only wants to do good for this baby, says Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz. And yet, with the very pure and high motivation of wanting to love and care for and do for this baby, she knows the pain that she is going to cause the real mother, because she knows what it's like to lose a baby. But in this case, the real mother will be losing a baby not to, God forbid, the baby passed away, but by being stolen. How evil must a person be to be willing to steal a baby from someone else when she herself knows the pain of losing a baby? You're talking about a Russia, a wicked person that is just unimaginable. So Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz asks, how is it possible for there to be such pure good and such pure evil? On the one hand, what she wants to do is only good, to love and to care and to nourish. And on the other hand, what she wants to do is so evil, to steal this baby from someone else. How is it possible to have this contradiction within a person? And Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz says, Or v'choshech meshamshin etzel ha'adam be'ir buvia. Light and darkness both exist, wrapped up in each other in every person. Ushnei ha'kochos yeshnam ke'echad b'kerav ha'adam. Every person has inside of them desires for good and desires for evil. Ve'ein kan kol stira. There is no contradiction, because this is a fact of human nature. She could be a woman, the woman without the baby, who is so evil, and at the same time, so loving and giving. It's not a contradiction. You know, so often we think about people with labels, with stereotypes. We might use the term religious or not religious. If we're talking about politics, we might use the term left and right. We might use the terms good and bad. It does a disservice to use those kinds of superficial labels about a person, because people are more complex than any label you can give them. Or v'choshech meshamshin be'irvuvia. Within every single person, without exception, there is both light, goodness, kindness, altruism, and choshech, darkness, a desire to hurt, evil, insensitivity. It is possible, not only possible, it is the truth that a person can be a tzaddik and a rasha at the same time, says Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz. And what that means is every good person has some bad within them, and every bad person has some good within them. Obviously, the balance is different for each person, but everyone has some balance of both or and choshech, light and darkness. And this narrative reminds us to never evaluate a person superficially, including ourselves. Every one of us is complex. Every one of us is multifaceted. I just finished reading a novel, a wonderful novel by Scott Turow. So Scott Turow is one of my favorite authors. He writes legal thrillers. Not only are the subjects that he writes about so interesting, but his craftsmanship, the way that he writes, his choice of words, his images is just, I find it to be genius. And I recommend highly any and all of his novels. So I just finished his novel, The Burden of Proof. It is incredible. I recommend it highly, The Burden of Proof. And near the end of the novel, the main character, who is a Jewish man named Sandy Stern, is present when another character dies. And Sandy Stern, who is by himself with this deceased person, with whom he had a very close and very complicated relationship, he says out loud this prayer: "Accept, dear God, the soul of Dixon Hartnell," that's the other character's name, "who made his own amends and who traveled his own way. He failed as we all fail, and perhaps more often than some. Yet he recognized fundamental truths. Not that we are evil, for we are not, but that by whatever name, self-interest, impulse, anger, lust, or greed, we are inclined that way. And that it is our tragedy to know that this can never change, our duty to try at every moment to overcome it, and our glory occasionally to succeed." And more or less, that is the story of every single one of us. So the second and final point, and this is a crucial lesson. It applies to us almost every day, probably. So let's talk about the other woman, the real mother, the woman who is holding the baby, who is actually the real mother of that baby. She is the one who said when Shlomo held up the sword, "No, give it to the other woman." Let's ask this question. And what I'm sharing with you now is based on a lecture by Rabbi Yisroel Reisman. This woman holding the baby, so she's the real mother, right? She knows, both women know that she is the real mother. So she knew that she was right. The other woman says, "You stole my baby." She knows that that's false. She says, "No, this is my baby. Your baby died." She knows, and it is the truth, that she is speaking the truth. When Shlomo holds up the sword, why would she say, "No, I'd rather give up my son to the other woman"? But it's her baby. She knows it's her baby. The other woman knows it's her baby. It's her baby. Why doesn't she insist on what is right? Why doesn't she say, "I'm not going to sacrifice to give up my baby because I am telling the truth"? Why doesn't she say that? Now, in this case, the answer is obvious, but the scenario is something that applies myriad times to each of us. And it's something that comes up on almost a daily basis. In this case, it's obvious. Because even though she was right, insisting on her right, insisting on the truth, would lead to a consequence that was worse than not getting what is hers. Because God forbid the baby would be harmed. For the other woman who was claiming the baby, and she was willing to agree that the baby should be cut in half and each woman given half the baby, for the other woman, being right was more important than the life of the child. Now, this is a very dramatic and serious example of this, but it applies in all kinds of scenarios. Our rabbis tell us, we've discussed this before, it is not only prohibited according to Jewish law, according to the Torah law, to start a machlokas, to start an argument. There is also a prohibition of being machzik b'machlokas, to continue a machlokas, to be a party to an argument, even when you are right. Because the consequences of machlokas, of arguing and fighting and dissension, the consequences can be worse than giving up the truth, giving up what is right. So should you always give in? Anytime somebody disagrees with you, should you always give in? Of course not. To do that would be to allow, even invite others to take advantage of you. Of course not. But here's the lesson. Before you insist on your position, before you continue the argument with another, and I'm talking about when you are right, before you do that, look at what the consequences of the argument are going to be. Look at what the consequences of the fight you are engaging in, and take your time. Do it calmly, not when you are enraged, but think carefully and calmly. What are the consequences in this situation of insisting that I am right, that what I am saying is true? And then decide if it's worth it. Usually, the consequences of the machlokas are worse than being right. The Duke of Wellington famously wrote, "Victory in war is only marginally better than defeat, because even the victors must bury their dead." So when you are tempted to anger, when you are tempted to argue, to insist that you are right, when you are right, when you feel that you are standing up for principle, that you must insist because it is the truth, when that happens to you, take a moment to see the sword hanging over the baby, held over this baby, ready, God forbid, to split it in two. And ask yourself, calmly, carefully, is it worth being right for the consequence that will ensue? Two crucial lessons from this famous passage that set the tone for the reign of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.